First at 9 this Sunday, the 11th of January 2026. Hurry and worry. Don't hasten to implement education reforms, Buddhist clergy urges the PM. Ready to listen to constructive criticism, PM vows. Reform pushback. Opposition claims government's reforms will irrevocably damage the education sector. Trade unions threaten action if reforms are not repealed. Former MP Vimal Veeravansha to launch Satyagraha tomorrow, calling for Education Minister's resignation. Costly decisions. Electricity consumers to bear 7.5 billion rupee loss caused by subpar coal imports, Frontline Socialist Party alleges. Receding torrents. Weather conditions improve as the deep depression weakens. Restoration of Northern and Talimana railway lines begin with Indian support.
Kalin baby soap rupial 90කට. Kalin baby podi හැමෝටමයි.
This is Derana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9 on the Derana News channel. I'm Aditya Singh joining you live with the latest in Sri Lanka and around the world. Brought to you by the only Sri Lankan media network to rise to the pinnacle across all media platforms, recognized as the best by every survey and beloved by the people. Now your top story tonight, the Buddhist clergy called on Prime Minister Dr. Harni Amarasuriya to only implement planned education reforms after a comprehensive 2-year study rather than hastening to implement them from this month. Responding to the request, the Prime Minister vowed to accept constructive criticism regarding the education reforms.
Chairman of the Dehiwala Shasana Rakshaka Bala Mandalaya and Chief Incumbent of Pinwata Purana Viharaya, Venerable Valhaputanne Nanda Sumanathera, was conferred the honorary title of Chief Sanganayaka of Salpiti Korale today. The title was bestowed by the Chief Prelate of the Kote Kalyani Samagri Dharma Mahasangha Sabha, Most Venerable Dr. Ittapana Dharma Lankara Mahathera. Prime Minister Dr. Harni Amarasuriya was also present at the occasion.
Today we are discussing education reforms. Education reforms are extremely important for a country like ours, but it must be guided by our principles. Our nation is founded on strong Buddhist cultural values. Even the Buddha listened to the voices of society when making revolutionary decisions. He listened to the people, respected their views and never ignored their concerns. Without meaningful education reforms, we will not be able to progress alongside the rest of the world. However, I propose to the Prime Minister that the planned education reforms only be implemented after a comprehensive 2-year study rather than being introduced in January. Only then can we move toward a reorganization that gives us confidence and hope for the future. The consequences of short-sighted reforms implemented in the past are being felt today. Therefore, I urge that this matter be reconsidered carefully.
Education reforms have become a widely discussed topic in society today, and we believe this conversation is both important and necessary. As the Thera mentioned, change is never easy and any attempt to reform will naturally face opposition. I fully agree that we must listen to the society. We must remain flexible and willing to adjust while safeguarding the core objectives of the reforms. We are ready to accept criticism and suggestions offered with understanding and fairness and remain open to continue dialogue. The Ministry of Education has a Buddhist Affairs Advisory Board from which we seek guidance on matters related to Buddhism and education reforms. We are already engaged in discussions with the chief prelates and will continue to do so as their guidance is valuable to us. At times, inaccurate information circulates within society and such matters need to be clarified. On the other hand, regardless of how well planned or sincere the intentions may be, mistakes can occur. We agree that when mistakes are identified, they must be acknowledged and corrected. This is why we view education reforms not as a short-term effort but as a long-term process. It cannot be completed overnight and will take between 10 to 15 years to be fully and properly implemented. We are approaching this process with great care, fully mindful that this country has its own culture and a unique heritage deeply influenced by Buddhism. This is a reality we fully recognize and respect. We remain open to discussion and guidance at all times, and I am grateful to the Theras for bringing these matters to light.
ඉදිරියට යන්නෙත් ගන්න තීරණ ගන්න කියන එකත් මම මතක් කරන්න කැමති.
ඔබේ සම හඳුනාගෙන ඖෂධීය ශාකසාරමය forever face wash එකක් භාවිතා කරන්න.
Meanwhile, education sector trade unions threaten action if the government fails to provide satisfactory responses to their demands regarding the forthcoming education reforms. These comments came against a backdrop of several demonstrations held in protest of the impending reforms.
The People's Struggle Movement staged protests in Tangol and Gaur today, demanding the immediate suspension of the new education reforms. Meanwhile, several education sector stakeholders commented on the government's education reforms.
We accept that education reforms are necessary, but we cannot accept these reforms. What kind of a country will be built when its culture and Buddhist heritage are uprooted? Steps were even taken to amend the Piriven Act. The chief prelates did not consent to an amendment to the act only to reform Piriven education. We cannot remain silent about moves that can create a crisis within the Buddhist order. The education reforms are a much needed move. It was much anticipated by the teaching community. We stand in support of the education reforms. Minister Lal Kanta claims this is not an education reform but a transformation. We too agree with that. It is Kannangara who introduced reforms. This is nothing but an obscenity. That is why we oppose it. The education minister reiterated that the education reforms are based on 5 pillars, the 5th being social awareness. Was society informed? No. The reforms should be suspended. Reconvene discussions and implement the reforms systematically. The President has granted us a meeting at 1 p.m. next Tuesday. The union will make the relevant decisions and convey them to the President in hope of delivering justice to children. If justice is not served, we will initiate a struggle. The issue cannot be resolved by only granting meetings to parties that secretly support the government. We are yet to receive an invitation for a discussion. We request that the President invite all stakeholders. We only object to Harini's reforms, not the education reforms as a whole. Postpone the grade 6 reforms until 2027. The grade 1 reforms, however, can be implemented this year. We observe that the education reforms enable children to access global knowledge during their school career itself. We view that as a very positive step. We ask those opposing the education reforms completely why they are rejecting reforms such as these.
Welcome back. Now, while protests and criticisms in the political arena continue to grow over education reforms, leader of the opposition Sajith Premadasa claims that the government, along with the Minister of Education, must assume accountability for the purportedly arbitrary and obscene education reforms. Parliamentarian Dilith Jayavira claims the reforms impede on free education, while former MP Vimal Veeravansa vowed to initiate a satyagraha tomorrow, calling for the immediate resignation of Education Minister Harani Amarasuriya.
The SJBs, whose main initiative donated medical equipment worth 2.8 million rupees to the Colonna Base Hospital. The handover ceremony was held today under the patronage of opposition leader Sajith Premadasa.
The reforms were presented hastily without subjecting it to adequate discourse. The reforms were presented through PowerPoint presentations. These obscene education reforms will pollute the minds of 4.1 million students. That is what we criticize. Education reforms are imperative. Changes must take place. The education sector must be modernized. Setting aside those actual requirements, obscene distortions have been incorporated into reforms. Who is responsible in this regard? Who will take up accountability? Who will answer to the public? The government, along with the Minister of Education, must provide answers. The lack of discourse and the lack of an effective process caused this obscenity.
Meanwhile, Sarvajana Balaya leader Dilith Jayavira oversaw the establishment of the Gajanayaka Division's Sarvajana Sabha in Veerakatiya today.
I urge all of you to take time and scrutinize the modules. I recall white papers being introduced to reform education when we were in school. We took to the streets against it back then. Many of my colleagues in parliament also joined me in protesting the government back then. History is repeating once again. The reforms proposed now seek to replace free education with module-based education. All children received the same text despite where they resided. They faced the same exam paper. There was a sense of social justice and equality. Where is that virtue today? These modules will carry a code with it for further learning, which can only be accessed through mobile phones and certain other tech devices. Do children residing in remote areas of Sri Lanka have massive TVs and stereos seen in many Colombo households to access further learning mentioned in these modules? Will children with outdated technology be able to access this information in the same quality? This is where the disparity was created. This is where free education will be doomed. The authors of the modules urge students to scan QR codes and visit foreign websites. This is what they call further learning. The cover of the book being printed might be President Dissanayaka's. However, its content was authored by Ranil Wickramasinghe.
In a separate development, leader of National Freedom Front Vimal Weerawansa visited the Malwatu Mahaviharaya today, where he called on Chief Prelate of the Siam Sect's Malwatu chapter, Venerable Tibbatuave Sri Sumangala Mahathera. During the meeting, former MP Weerawansa appraised the Chief Prelate of the Satyagraha campaign, expected to be launched tomorrow in front of the Ministry of Education. The Satyagraha will call for the immediate resignation of Education Minister Dr. Harini Amarasuriya.
In developed nations, subject ministers will resign immediately if they make embarrassing blunders. That was the standard they vowed to espouse. Over the past few years, certain incumbent ministers cited various examples of foreign leaders taking accountability over blunders. They spoke about how Japan's transport minister resigned after a train wreck. This catastrophe is far worse than any train wreck. However, the Premier still refuses to resign. If that is the case, we must do everything in our power to oust her.
The education reform controversy elicited further impassioned thoughts from across the political spectrum today.
Discourse seems to be centered more on the Prime Minister than the actual education reforms. Many speak about the Prime Minister's attitudes and preferences. Most critics seem to be religious leaders. They seem to know everything there is to know about the Prime Minister. They say that society, taken in itself, is a good metric of a country's education system. In that sense, the level of education received by those who criticize the Prime Minister and the education reforms is self-evident. Some have even gone to the extent of claiming that a Prime Minister educated in Europe is incapable of implementing policies in Sri Lanka. Many at the top of religious institutions are men. Therefore, hints of misogyny are also palpable. Sexual frustration is also apparent. At the moment, many attempt to leave President Dissanayaka's side and attack the second tier. That is merely a part of their political strategy. Their ultimate intention is to direct an attack on the President himself. However, that is an impossible feat to achieve.
එහෙම කරලා එතකොට ඒ ටික ඉවරයි අන්තිමට අතෙන්ට යනවා. කවදාවත් බෑ.
ඒක ඇත්තටම කුමන්ත්‍රණයක්. එහෙම නැත්නම්
The Grade 6 module controversy is a conspiracy. It is most definitely a premeditated act. Investigations into the matter are currently in progress. However, we vehemently object to all disparaging remarks made against the Prime Minister.
අදහස් දැක්වීම අපි තරයේ ප්‍රතික්ෂේප කරනවා.
සොර අපි ගෙනාපු විශ්වාස භංගය තුල කිසි විටකත්
The opposition's no confidence motion makes no disrespectful reference against the Prime Minister as a woman. However, the motion points out that the education minister is incompetent. Yet, it appears to us that the government is trying to spin a different story. We are baffled by the slogans chanted by certain activists allied with the government. This could be a political conspiracy against the Prime Minister brewing with the JVP itself. They seem to be consigning the Prime Minister to doom.
දැන් මේ කරන්නේ අගමැතිතුමියව ඒගොල්ලන්ම විනාශ කරන එක.
ඒ කරපු නිලධාරී අයට ඒකේ වගකීම
Officials responsible over the matter must be held accountable. However, this seems to be an inadvertent mistake. However, since the consequences are detrimental despite it being inadvertent, action must be taken. However, mistakes could happen since we are all humans. The incumbent government will never permit anything contrary to our culture and values.
නොගැලපෙන කිසිම දෙයක් අපේ ආණ්ඩුවේ සිදු වෙන්නේ නැහැ.
Now in other news, the Frontline Socialist Party raises concern over the suspicious circumstances under which the CEB awarded Trident Chempa Limited the coal import tender for this year. The Frontline Socialist Party points to the company's track record marred by corruption allegations and further reveals that electricity consumers will have to bear a whopping 7.5 billion rupee loss sustained through the recent import of subpar coal by the company in question. In other news out of the power sector, Pubudu Niroshan Hendigalage has decided to resign from office as the Director General of the Power Sector Reform Secretariat despite a service extension issued with the intervention of the President.
The Power Sector Reform Secretariat was established in 2024 in a bid to facilitate the Ceylon Electricity Board's restructuring. Pubudu Niroshan Hendigalage served as the Secretariat's Director General since October 2024. A year later, in October 2025, the Secretary to the Ministry of Energy took steps to extend his term of service by 1 year. However, the extension was annulled by Minister of Energy Kumara Jayakodi. Subsequently, off the back of President Dissanayaka's intervention, steps were taken to extend Pubudu Niroshan Hendigalage's term of service until June 27th this year. Despite the extension sanctioned by the President, Pubudu Niroshan Hendigalage has reportedly resigned from the top office of the Power Sector Reform Secretariat. Through a letter, Hendigalage informed the Secretary to the Ministry of Power and Energy that he will resign with effect from January 15th. In a separate development, the recent importation of a subpar stock of coal pushed the Sri Lanka's power sector into yet another controversy. The Frontline Socialist Party reveals that the government incurred a whopping 7.5 billion rupees over the import of this stock of coal, which was earmarked by Norachole's Lakvijaya power plant.
Lanka Viduli Bala Mandalata Idiri Vasara Sandaha.
The CEB tender for this year's coal imports were awarded last year to Trident Kemphar Limited, an Indian company. Typically, tenders for coal imports are called in April. However, this tender was postponed until July 2025. During this period, 2 companies registered, one of which was Trident Kemphar Limited. Questions have since been raised as to whether the tender was postponed to award it to a specific company. According to procurement conditions, the importing company is required to have traded at least 1 million metric tons of coal as a qualification. However, with the intervention of Minister of Energy Kumara Jayakodi, this requirement was reportedly reduced from 1 million to 100,000 metric tons without the approval of the procurement committee. Concerns have been raised as to whether the tender conditions were lowered because the relevant company has traded only 100,000 metric tons. An Auditor General's report issued in 2016 revealed that Trident Kemphar Limited violated procurement conditions when importing rice for Lanka Satusa in 2014. Therefore, allegations of corruption already loom over this company. The owner of the company, Sarath Chandra Reddy, and its local representative, Sarath Bandara Jayasundara, are also allegedly corrupt. According to certain reports, the government was urged not to proceed with the import. However, the shipment was imported nonetheless. Subsequent sample testing reportedly revealed that the coal did not meet required quality standards. Ultimately, the financial loss of 7.5 billion rupees will be passed on to consumers through electricity tariffs.
Now, with the deep depression gradually weakening, to a low pressure zone, the Department of Meteorology anticipates the persisting heavy downpours to subside starting tomorrow. Meanwhile, the restoration work on the northern and Talemana railway lines commenced today with the anticipation of concluding this endeavour by April this year.
The deep depression that impacted the country in recent days is now gradually weakening into a low-pressure system. As at 10 this morning, the deep depression centered over the Gulf of Mannar has continued to lose intensity. Consequently, the Department of Meteorology indicated that the influence of this weather system on the island's climatic conditions is steadily diminishing.
We expect the persisting rains to subside from tomorrow onwards. The warnings issued for fishing and naval communities preventing them from venturing out to sea have been lifted.
Despite the easing of the system, heavy fog was reported across several parts of the island during the early hours of today. Meanwhile, restoration work on the northern and Talemana railway lines, which sustained extensive damage due to Cyclone Ditwa, commenced today. These efforts are being carried out with financial assistance worth $5 million extended by the Government of India. Marking the occasion, a special event was held at the Mahava railway station, attended by the Indian High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, Santosh Jha, along with the Minister of Transport, Highways and Urban Development, Bimal Ratnayaka.
The idea is that whatever is really, really very urgent must be done under a faster implementation program, and for which we have provided the grant. Because very clearly it is not the assistance and the amount that has been provided, but the speed at which we can deliver that is very, very important. I'm told that this work is likely to be completed by April, and that there are other ancillary works that were continuing. Those all will be completed by May of this year.
DITWA has completely taken out similar to the 2026 full budget. So when it comes to railway and the roads, which is under our ministry, it was the most affected. 430 places in roads and 166 places in railway lines were damaged, especially due to landslide. Around altogether 600. Out of $230 million, bridges, $25 to $30 million, it will come as a gift, it's a grant. And then for roads, 100 million, it will be a loan, and this $5 million is a gift, and another $100 million for reconstruction of our roads. So in altogether, only for our ministry, around 230, sometimes it can go up to 235 roads.
In a related development, the Bellihul Oya Bridge, which had been under reconstruction, was officially reopened yesterday following a closure that lasted 45 days. The temporary bridge was installed within a period of 10 days through the joint efforts of the Sri Lanka Corps of Engineers and the Indian Defence Forces.
The upcountry railway line suffered the most damage due to DITWA. We expect to conclude the restoration process within a year and launch a train journey to Kandy as soon as possible.
In the meantime, Minister of Plantation and Community Infrastructure Samantha Widiaratna announced that the compensation of $5 million allocated for landslides caused by Cyclone DITWA will not be extended to landslides occurring in the future.
By now, the damage caused by DITWA should have been assessed. As the next step, the government will provide 1.2 million rupees for the reconstruction of damaged houses, while 400,000 rupees will be provided to destroyed lands. The 5 million compensation will be granted only to cover damages caused by DITWA. Damage caused by landslides that occurred recently will not be covered by this compensation. The public must also be informed in this regard.
Additionally, the Ministry of Education has announced that the GCE advanced level examinations, which were initially postponed due to Cyclone DITWA, will now be conducted from tomorrow through to the 20th of January.
Foreign Minister of China Wang Yi is scheduled to arrive in the country tonight for a two-day official visit. Foreign Minister Wang Yi is scheduled to meet Minister of Foreign Affairs Vijitha Herath tomorrow morning, during which bilateral discussions between the two countries are expected to take place. The Chinese Foreign Minister is also scheduled to meet President Anura Dissanayake and Prime Minister Dr. Harni Amarasuriya. During the visit, the Foreign Minister will review Sri Lanka's post-recovery efforts following Cyclone DITWA and also brief on the assistance being provided by the Chinese government. Sri Lanka's postal service stated that it has exceeded the revenue target set by the Treasury for last year. According to Postmaster General Ruwan Satkumara, the Postal Department recorded a revenue of 13.1 billion rupees in 2025. He further notes that a significant number of new recruitments and confirmations were carried out across various positions of the Sri Lanka Postal Department during last year. In June 2025, the Ministry of Health and Mass Media took steps to grant letters of appointments to 378 sub-postmasters of the Sri Lanka Postal Service. The Postmaster General added that this was the first instance of sub-postmasters being confirmed in service since 2020. Welcome back. Now, Minister of Civil Aviation Anura Karunatilaka says the government plans to strengthen Sri Lanka's domestic air services with a view of attracting more high-end tourists to the island. He made these remarks during a visit to Koggala today.
Minister of Ports and Civil Aviation Anura Karunatilaka today engaged in a tour of inspection at the facilities of Ceylon Aeronautical Services Private Limited at the Koggala Free Trade Zone. Speaking to the media, the minister emphasized the importance of strengthening domestic air services to attract more high-end tourists.
Domestic aviation can play a vital role in attracting high-end tourists. It is important to develop civil air services with an entertainment value. The government is focusing on taking pertinent policy decisions and developing required infrastructure.
Minister Karuna Tilaka also commented on ongoing airport development projects.
We have already drafted several plans to strengthen domestic air services. The Katunaga airport is being renovated with JICA's support. Several development phases have commenced at the Palali airport in Jaffna. Renovation is also underway at the Hingurakkode airport. Several decisions will be made regarding the Mattala airport. We expect 2026 to be a decisive year for this sector.
Now in international business news, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent claims that additional US sanctions on Venezuela could be lifted as soon as next week to facilitate oil sales. The US Treasury Secretary is also said to meet the heads of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank on their re-engagement with Venezuela. Bessent said in an interview recently that almost $5 billion worth of Venezuela's current frozen IMF special drawing rights, monetary assets, could be deployed to help rebuild the country's economy. The moves are part of Trump administration's efforts to stabilize Venezuela and encourage the return of US oil producers to the country a week after US forces captured Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro in Caracas. President Donald Trump signed an executive order blocking courts or creditors from impounding Venezuelan oil revenue held in the United States Treasury accounts, declaring that these funds should be safeguarded to help Venezuela. That's all for tonight from First at 9. For the latest developments around the clock, stay in touch with Ada Derana, the Sri Lankan brand of international excellence. Thank you for joining. Have a great night.
From across the nation and around the world, this is Sri Lanka's #1 news source, Ada Derana.